sec. We're going to be going over privilege escalation. O104 is our pseudo course number. So yeah, let's get right into current events actually. Current events, we had the Universal Health Services hit with an alleged ransomware attack. I say alleged because the IT team discussed how the attack was fit the guideline for a ransomware attack. One nurse reported that Sunday morning systems were unresponsive. That was a nurse in North Dakota, I believe. One of those areas. CISA claims federal agency network breach. There's an unnamed threat actor with that, and it was the unnamed federal agency's enterprise network that got breached. There's also coffee makers sending info or information over plain text. I think I actually saw that on ThreatWire the other day. If you don't like the news, you can submit some. Here's the link down here. So yeah. And I think, was Shane going to talk about root?
Sure, I can. Okay. All right. So basically, if you want to get into offensive security competitions, but you don't know where to start, Noob to Root is a good thing to sign up for, and we'll take you through some introductory competitions in coordination with DefSec. Just about it.
Links are there. These slides are available at the link as well. So if you want to hit those, please do. All right, privilege escalation. So we've got kind of our agenda for today. What is privilege escalation? Why user proofs suck? Privilege escalation basics, digging into misconfigurations, working with credentials, plotting for exploits, where can you practice these, and the road ahead. So first off, what is privilege escalation? Well, privilege escalation is thought of abusing your current privileges to a system, process, or entity in order to gain higher privileges. This could be using a user account to fish more enticing user accounts on a web app. This could be going into a restaurant dressed as a chef to get into the kitchen. This could be exploiting a misconfigured tool to give you more freedom on the system or give you a root shell or something of that nature. So what's wrong with your foothold privileges? In offensive engagements, a foothold is not always just game over for an entity. You always want to take it the extra mile and try to really drive home the impact of a certain foothold or external vulnerability. The attacking team may want to perform an administrative task like harvest credentials, get free food, wipe logs. They also may just want to show that complete system takeover is possible. This is a cool sticker I found. One of my friends had it. Oh. So what are the basics of privilege escalation? Well, for this PowerPoint presentation, this isn't comprehensive by any means, but I split them into two categories. Misconfigurations being mismanaged permissions, which is a violation of authorization, or mismanaged user accounts, which can be considered a violation of authentication. Breaking something is another category. This could be logic flaws in code or anything that's considered a bug and will have a patch released by the manufacturer or entity administering that system. So let's start off with Linux misconfigurations. This isn't a comprehensive list, again, but I will provide resources later so that you can look at larger lists. Some things to check for are their weird permissions of executables. Executables might have permissions called set user IDs or set group IDs, which will allow this executable to run as either the user or the group instead of whoever actually ran it. So if you find one of these permissions on a binary, like we have a command to find those down here. For the group ID, it will run as the group who owns that binary instead of you running it, even though you ran it. Something cool. Sudo privileges, sudo-l, if sudo's installed in the system, it'll tell you if you're allowed to use sudo, and that's defined in /etc/sudoers, I believe, on most systems. And yeah, that's a good way to prevent. You can look at maybe you're allowed to run a notepad or nano or vim as root without being prompted for a password. From there, you can break out of those environments and sort of explore the system as root. Are there any scheduled jobs like cron jobs, custom scripts, anything listening that's going to call back? Are there any hard-coded credentials, secrets in the history of your current user that you've compromised or that you've obtained foothold as? Are there any abnormal group memberships? Are they members of maybe Docker, or Wireshark, or LXD, or anything that isn't standard on a system? Are there any weird third-party softwares? Maybe there is proprietary software that they've developed in-house that's housed on the system. It just depends on the system. It's kind of a case-by-case scenario. You can abuse these as needed, and like I say, there are more resources mentioned, and I give out a lot of links following more slides. Here we go. So there we've got a checklist. Got Milk is a cool Privesk blog. We've got scripts in here that automate a lot of the commands you would run going through certain blogs or researching. Try not to just, if you're getting into it, try not to just straight up, oh, I want to run the script right now and go for it. Try to know what you're looking for and know the misconfiguration and really dig for it and just understand the basics of looking for it. There's also some threads down here of specifics in terms of Linux privilege escalation. Moving on to Windows. I give a few examples here. These are just some cool kind of Windows misconfigurations that people may not have known or been familiar with. First one is unquoted executable service paths. So over here on the right, I have a service named Poggers that I made. And as you can see, the path to the executable has spaces in it, but it's not quoted on the ends. So you may have heard that if you have spaces or weird characters in a string, you have to escape those. Normally in Windows, you could actually just put quotation marks, double quotation marks around the entire thing and you'd be good. Well, the reason you should do this is because if you don't, we have a sort of ambiguous way that the operating system is looking at how to execute certain things. So let's see, we've got our first order. What it'll look for is it will look for a program.exe. Why does it do that? Well, C program space. Okay, the first space, we're going to replace that with the .exe. That's where it's going to look for first for the executable. Next, if it doesn't find anything there, it's going to go to program files, test.exe, since I have a test space folder. From there, it'll keep going down the line. If it doesn't find anything, last but not least, it'll hit its actual desired location. Now, the thing is, if we have write access to maybe not this final destination here, but any of the folders in between, such as test folder or some weird path folder, then we can actually make our executable. For the proof of concept I did, it's just a sum.exe inside the some weird path folder. Inside that test folder, I just put sum.exe, and when you start the service as your normal user account, it will go ahead and run your executable. And those can be generated using like MSF Venom or compiling them yourselves, writing them in C# or C, however you like to. It's just whatever payload you want. If you do have access, write access, I should say, again to that directory, feel free to go ahead and abuse those privileges. And here's a more detailed tutorial on setting that up and the exploitation and the fine-grained permissions that come with it. There's also a PowerShell commandlet I've got here that actually will show you services owned by local system, which is like a root for Windows. And it's going to show you disabled ones so that you can enable them when you have successfully exploited them, if you have. Talking about DLL hijacking a little bit. Oh, this thing covers the bottom. That's fine. Consider it a misconfiguration. Your executables will use DLLs, dynamic linking libraries, I think is what it stands for. Could be wrong. But basically, it's an import that your executable is going to use. And the way these are looked for, if you've ever downloaded a game, you may have seen that in the game folder with the exe, there's like something.dll or there's coolcharacter.dll. All these DLLs. Well, these are actually loaded whenever you execute the binary if it uses those. So, like I said, you've got DLLs in memory and known DLLs that are going to be considered safe. It's going to look at those first, like default DLLs on the system. But then any DLLs it doesn't find in there, it's going to look inside the app directory before it looks in your system32 or system directories. That's good because if you have write permission to that certain path, you can make your own malicious DLL and have the binary run as whatever, whether it be a service or some type of scheduled task, it'll run and import your DLL as whatever ran it. So I've got some articles here too on DLL hijacking clarified, and the other one's covered by this box right now, but you can get the slides and click on those yourselves. Pretty good blogs, in my opinion. Auto run locations. There are registry keys that will actually have a field for you to fill out where you can run executables, and these executables are run on different things. Each registry key has its own kind of trigger. So I think there's a run once registry key that will run on boot. It's a popular exploit, at least where I'm from, to go up to a computer physically, put a Windows boot disk in it, modify the registry keys if the disk is unencrypted, so that when it turns on, cmd.exe launches. And when it launches, it'll actually run as NT authority system or local system administrator. Cool little workaround. I believe Kyle Corman demonstrated some local privilege escalation techniques using physical access to a machine. with an unencrypted disk. So definitely a cool thing to check out. All it is just a registry key holding that executable name. I've put a little list in here of auto-run registry key locations and what triggers them and when they're triggered, because they're all triggered by something else. This one here is triggered by safe boot. This is on a Linux, or not Linux, a Windows VM I had. So yeah. Misconfigurations, following up with Windows, there's actually a couple of registry keys here that allow users to install MSI packages as root, no matter who ran it. If that's enabled in the local machine scope and the current user scope, then whenever you run an MSI, it will run as root. Now, to abuse this, you can exploit it by using powerup.ps1. There's a module called write-user add MSI, which just creates another user account, creates that root, then you can abuse that. There's always install elevated Metasploit module available. I'm not too familiar with that one, but that was one that a friend suggested to me when looking into this. Going more, are there members of backup operators? Maybe you've compromised a user account who belongs to that backup operator group. Well, what does this mean? Members of backup operators, this is straight from the MS docs, can backup and restore all files on a computer, regardless of the permissions that protect those files. That's kind of nuts if you think about it, because you're essentially able to restore or back up system files. No matter your privileges, you're a member of backup operators, so you have those. You could overwrite the exe to certain services, you could overwrite registry keys, you could loot pretty much anything you want from the system using the SE backup and SE restore privileges. Just have fun with it. And there's a blog on here detailing more abuse using backup operators group. And I've got an image on the right to demonstrate kind of the rise of backup operators. Power users no longer does anything, I think past like Windows 7 or anything. I think XP is when it was technically another thing, but now it's just regular user. Talking about domain misconfigurations. With Windows domains, Active Directory is kind of a collection of data, objects, or policies. So what you want to check there, are there any weird group memberships? You really want to get into this because some domains can be really messy with certain security groups being made, and maybe system administrators need specific security groups made throughout the domain for proprietary software. Who knows? Do your compromised resources have direct object control over other things? Are there other accounts of interest besides the administrator account? You know, everybody talks about, oh, let's get domain admin. Well, maybe there are other accounts that will allow you to do that easier, and maybe you can sidestep your way into those accounts. Is Kerberos no pre-authentication required? What that basically is if that is enabled on an account, then anybody can request a Kerberos ticket for that user, and they can actually crack the hash of that. Now, that again falls down to how secure is the password and whatnot. A lot of service accounts I've seen will have that setting enabled, so that's an attack vector that could be useful. Are there any users that have certain remote access to other machines? Now, Hack the Box and VulnHub and Singular Boxes that you work with that are domain controllers won't really have this as a big pivot point, but in actual like larger domains that have 4 or 5 computers, you may want to know which computers you have remote access to, because that's another attack avenue through another location in the network. Are there any credentials or secrets in the object descriptions or attributes? You can find stuff using LDAP domain dump or just querying certain fields of user accounts or objects. Active Directory, again, holds all this information within it. Of those fields, there's a new technology called LAPS, Local Administrator Password Solution. It's basically rotating local administrator passwords for workstations, and that is all stored in the domain, and it's actually stored in the attributes of the computer object. So you can find these users by doing find ADM, password extended rights, identity, and specify your OU. There are other more vanilla PowerShell ways to do it, and there are other scripts out there that will do it as well. Just something to keep in mind if you maybe need to take over some local workstations. Talking about group permissions a little more, because this one, like a few slides won't just do it justice, you know? So with group permissions, Active Directory does hold all this information. Your foothold access should allow you to query some more information about either memberships or computers or users or policies. There are a couple of tools that will do this. For this PowerPoint, I kind of focus on Bloodhound a little bit. And Bloodhound Python and sharphound.exe and LDAP domain dump will actually retrieve this information for you and put it into a package that you can feed into the Bloodhound graph. Bloodhound is a graphing tool that can be used to map that domain info and plan attack strategies. And it has cool queries in it that let you see shortest path to domain admin or something like that. I do have to note sharphound.exe, I believe, is only a local executable. So if you're working with garbage connections, I'd recommend using Bloodhound Python or LDAP domain dump and trying to remotely acquire that LDAP information instead of remoting into the box using sharphound and then retrieving the huge zip file that is dropped, because it could be a large zip file. Talking about Bloodhound a little bit more, I've linked the GitHub there. It'll ingest data from several JSON generating resources. You've got Bloodhound Python, LDAP domain dump, sharphound. It's got pre-built queries. Don't rely on these too much because there really is no silver bullet query to say, hey, you're going to pwn this domain easy. You want to know what attributes you're after and attack those and find them out as needed. The pre-built queries are good starting grounds for using samples and seeing like, oh, look, these graphs connect and oh, we can escalate privileges here. But they're definitely not your solves every problem you'll ever have type solution. A little note about credentials: if you have credentials, or if maybe you want to test different credentials on different user accounts, here are a couple of ways to do so. With CMD, you can just use run as. I've got run as /user. The username is investigator. If you're doing a domain computer, you would just do domain name /username, so domain name /investigator. And then you specify your command and arguments right after. It'll prompt you for the password, you'll enter that, and you should be good. With PowerShell, you can do this a little bit differently. The start process commandlet actually accepts a credential object from Windows. So you'll have to specify that, and you have to do this little fun jazz to get that converted into a credential object. But then you'll just launch your initial executable or your initial command, and then any arguments will be at the end in an arguments list. Linux, this was the only way that I found on one of my local systems, and I tried it on another one. It worked. Using su, if you just do su username and then input a password, it'll get you in there if the authentication was successful. So talking about misconfigurations, Bose, I touched on looking at secrets in kind of the bash history and whatnot. That's there. PowerShell actually has a console history as well. Here's the location. User profile is just going to be under your C, users, username, and then the rest is this long spiel. So yeah. Here I've got links to privilege escalation, tactics, scripts, enumeration guides, different presentations. This is a really good one if you're really wanting to get into Active Directory and whatnot. PowerUp is a cool toolkit for AD exploration and exploitation. And you have the exploitation in recon cheat sheet there. Talking about exploits. So this is kind of the second category of privilege escalation. Exploiting, again, is something that will be considered a bug. You'll usually have a patch for it, or developers will get angry at you and say, hey, we need to patch this because it's not meant to be there. Well, I like to say that exploitation can be based on your previous research or somebody else's previous research, or could one day be considered previous research. Some basics of gathering information so you can start exploiting is get version numbers. Maybe there are researchers out there who have already crapped out like 12 CVEs for this product or for this version number, and you can get root like that, Are there any other resources utilized by that actual binary? Are there any file locks, registry keys, imported DLLs, or libraries that you could abuse? A few PowerPoint slides won't really do it as much justice. Exploit dev is a huge field, and it's awesome. Google is definitely your friend. I mean, through all this, Google is your friend. But in this case specifically, Google's definitely your friend. Here's some resources. We got the Exploit DB, your exploit development articles from Corlan, some cool stuff there. Exploit Learning, a website with some cool, easy like Linux exploitation stuff. I think it does get harder pretty quick. So you've also got Temple of Pwn channel on Kernel Popper Slack. Cool little group that I joined. And we learn about buffer overflows, memory attacks, and cool stuff like that that will help you in terms of exploitation research and development. We've also got Windows Exploit Suggester and the Linux Exploit Suggester, just some cool GitHub projects where it takes version numbers of kernel and other softwares and will try to recommend exploits that'll work. So where can you practice privilege escalation? Got a couple of resources here. I'm kind of biased towards TryHackMe because I've been on a binge recently. But we've got some PrivEsc arenas. We've got a local privilege escalation workshop from Hack in Paris 2019. They made that free, so that is a cool resource. They've got an exploitability guide. They've got scripts that you throw on a Windows VM to make it misconfigured and vulnerable. Metasploitable 2 is also a great resource, and Hack the Box is definitely a great resource because privilege escalation is pretty much like half the battle. So yeah, talking about the road ahead, there are some mainstream functions that will make privilege escalation fundamentally different for attackers. One of those functions is privilege access workstations. The concept is users have multiple identities, and they have a lower privilege identity and a higher privilege identities. And as you can see on the right here, I've got a little diagram. User workstations wouldn't normally use admin resources. However, admin resources can go into user resources. So just some food for thought there on thinking what's going to be the escalation route. Excuse me. What exploitation tactics will be mainstream from this point on? Are there going to be configurations that are going to be abused easily? Are there going to be blogs talking about, oh, hey, this default setting sucks and you can get root using this technique? Just some food for thought on that. Be creative with it is all I'm trying to get at. We did have a live demo planned, but something happened last minute to where my cross-site scripting actually didn't go through, and I don't know, web app patched itself or something. I'm still looking into it. Didn't want to keep you guys waiting on the presentation too long. So that's all I've got. Appreciate your time. Any questions? I guess I got to look at the question slide, right? Let me drop screen really quick.
So while Angel is looking at that really quickly, if you have not filled out attendance for this week for OffSec, please go to attendance.offsec.club and fill that out.
We had attendance?
Yeah, we did.
Gotcha.
You didn't let me talk. No, all good, all good. No.
All of these are illegal if permissions isn't given to execute them, right? Well, that comes down to authorized access. What are you authorized to do on a system? If you are maybe a worker who remotes into a system and you're meant to go and edit a file or something like that, and maybe you have to do it as root, but you abuse that and you get root on the system and you do it to do some other nasty stuff or do something that's outside of your description, then it could technically be an illegal offense. It always just depends on your actual level access and what you're authorized to perform on that. Could you dress up as a rat in order to get into Ratatouille? I think you could. Gusteau would probably recommend you do that. But yeah, besides that, I don't think there are any other questions besides Tristan saying you didn't let me say that.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Oh, thank you. Yeah, so expect a video on the demonstration. I'll try to get that going. Hopefully it does work and we can get it going. But yeah, thank you all for coming. Really appreciate your time. We have a King of the Hill match this Friday at 5:30 p.m. CST. Look out for an invite link 2 hours in advance because that's as early as they will let me generate them. If the link says it's full, then don't worry, hang tight. I will throw another link and we will get everybody into a hacking room. We don't care about skill level. It's kind of like a collaborative effort to see us pwn the box. So make sure you join and kind of learn something new.